Hey everyone, welcome back to Conversations with Kristi. Just a quick note before we start this episode. It includes discussions of childhood sexual abuse and may be challenging for some listeners. Please take care of yourself as you listen, and as always, there's resources on my website or in the show notes. Just a little bit about today's episode. I'm joined with Rosalia Rivera, founder of Consent Parenting, and we have an amazing, powerful and trauma-informed conversation about parenting, consent, and why so many people and parents struggle to engage with abuse prevention, especially when they are dealing with their own traumas and their own abuse backgrounds, and even though they desperately want to do the right thing for their kids. This episode is about compassion, healing, and doing prevention in a way that doesn't overwhelm or re-traumatize parents. Again, if you need resources or support, you can find them on my website, but let's go and listen to what Rosalia has to say. Good morning. Well, good morning for myself, but I am with a very special guest. I'm really excited to be joined by Rosalia Rivera, founder of Consent Parenting, host of About Consent podcast, and one of the most powerful consent educators and abuse prevention specialists in our space. I can tell you I'm a bit of a fangirl and I have been meaning to have you on the podcast for a while. So thank you so much for being here today and for working with me between our big time zones, because it's like 16 hours difference.
Yeah.
So, like I said, you have been an inspiration to me. I haven't been in this space for as long as you have, but when I think about who I want to be when I grow up, it's you.
Goodness.
So thank you for chatting to me. I guess what my listeners would want to hear is, because my podcast is based similar to yours, to talking to parents and adults about child safety and how to prevent child sexual abuse. So tell me how consent parenting started and how you became consent parenting, because you're one of the biggest names in this industry.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, Kristi. I actually admire the way that you teach this information as well. And so I was really excited when you invited me to join you. Um, so consent parenting, I love that we're both talking to parents because I've seen a lot of education around this topic, just to adults in general, but I think parents are the biggest, like, we're the biggest stakeholders in this work. And for me, as a survivor myself with lived experience of child sexual abuse at the hands of my father, from a generation of survivors, my mother is a survivor, my sister is a survivor, I have many family members who are survivors. I realized when I became a parent that this was something I wanted to talk to my kids about. My own memories actually didn't even surface until I became a parent. So it was a really interesting journey because I thought it was just my sister, and it turned out that it was also me. But when I started wanting to educate my oldest, who is actually now 14, he was 4 at the time, I started digging into all the information that I could find, and I found it to be extremely triggering because I didn't realize I had my own trauma. And so I went to a therapist. I was like, why am I getting so triggered? Trying to just teach my kids about this. Like, is it because of my sister, And a lot of memories that I had of my own abuse started to now make sense. These sort of fragmented pieces of like, why was I afraid of my dad? Why didn't I want to go on a trip with him by myself? Why? Why? And it was all starting to come to the surface. And I realized that a lot of the information that was being shared about this topic wasn't coming from a trauma-informed place for parents who were survivors. And then as I started digging deeper, I realized how prevalent this was. And I thought, oh my gosh, there must be so many parents who are going through this, right? Who are either unhealed, haven't stepped into their own healing journeys, or getting triggered. And then are probably experiencing what I went through, which was that I would get triggered. I would stop educating myself. I would just become overprotective instead of educating myself more, becoming proactive. And so that cycle really became toxic for me. I realized I have 3 kids. So every time that, a new child needed to go to daycare or needed to go do something more independently, it would come up again, like the fear and the anxiety. So I thought, well, why isn't anybody talking about this? And isn't there a way to navigate this in a way that's not as triggering? So that's what kind of put me on the path of figuring out, how do I talk about this to the survivor experience, but also in a way that really lands with them to get them to move through those triggers and I'm not a mental health professional, but I wanted to help them find those resources so that they
Yep.
could put themselves on those healing paths. And I think that that's just in general for any parent. I think all parents have some kind of trauma, whether it's neglect from a parent or sexual abuse or
Yeah.
somewhere in between. There's something that needs to be healed. And so that was a big part of my advocacy work with getting this education out there to parents was, we need to heal from whatever we went through. So we're not putting our kids at risk because we can't push ourselves to get through and do this work and be proactive. And interestingly enough, as I started to do this, I realized that there there are two different kinds of parents. There are parents who are completely unaware that
Mm,
this is an issue because they've never experienced it or they don't think that they know someone. They likely
yeah.
do know somebody who's a survivor,
Yeah.
but they think that they don't. So it hasn't directly impacted their lives. So they are walking around with the not my kid syndrome. And then you have other parents who are acutely aware because of their own experience and are hyper vigilant, overprotective, still not educating themselves because it's triggering. And so
Yes.
you get these two sides of the spectrum that are avoiding the topic altogether, and it's not
Mm.
protecting kids. And so I wanted to really approach this education with a sensitivity to both of those types of parents to try to help get this message across and really bridge that gap so we can start being more preventive focused instead of just responding to it after it happens.
Yeah, such an interesting there's so many points in everything you just explained there because like you having your own children and then, trying to, educate them about body safety or just safety in general. That was your like a lot of parents they have their kids and then their memories resurface like it's been suppressed and repressed and that's one of the things that I am very acutely aware of is how many parents contact me and go, "Oh my gosh, I've just had my first child and all of a sudden I remember I was abused."
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so it's like your brain has protected you until that point, and then you have your own children, and of course, that is your body and your nervous system and your brain goes, "Hey, we need to protect these kids," and then all of a sudden, bam, you're dealing with a brand new baby or a child, and then you're dealing with your trauma as well, and so it's very prevalent, and I'm sure you hear it a lot.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's heartbreaking because there are parents who, on top of everything that you worry about as a parent, now
Yeah,
you're dealing with this. And if you've never disclosed, you feel very alone because you're like, who do I
yeah,
talk to about this? How do I explain this? Somebody's, going to think that I'm being paranoid. And it's
yeah,
actually, you're not being paranoid. You're just having awareness. Your nervous system is responding to this. And if someone isn't educated about, let's say, grooming,
yeah,
they may be seeing those red flag signs, but they're not educated about it, so they don't know how to articulate it. And then they think, someone says, "Oh, you're being, obsessed or worried or paranoid about this." And then they might dismiss it, and
yeah.
then put their child at risk. So it's just so critical for parents to get educated, but to do it in a way that makes sense for them, that is trauma informed, and that can help them move through this because there are so many great tools today versus 20 years ago for
Oh,
parents, to be able to do this work. And a lot of times they're learning it themselves for the first time, you know?
yeah.
So it's an education for both the parent and the child.
For sure. And this generation is definitely doing a lot of healing and a lot of work that previous generations haven't done or didn't have the tools or didn't have the resources to be able to heal and to protect. Because the other interesting you shared was that when you were learning about this stuff, it was causing you to shut down. And you probably hear this all the time, and I've heard it of stories of parents or children when they were children, trying to disclose and their parents have dismissed them, rejected the disclosure, and basically shut them down. And I think for a lot of people that does a lot of damage and it can harm that relationship, not only that relationship with the parent, but it can harm that person and they have added trauma from the abuse. And the interesting point is for some people, if they have not healed their own trauma, a disclosure will that they don't have any tools in their tool belt to be able to actually receive that disclosure. And a lot of our parents probably were in that space. They just didn't know how to deal with it. So they shut everything down and repressed it because a lot of parents will go, "What are you talking about? You never told me." And
Yeah.
yeah, so that's another really interesting thing. And there's a lot to be. It's really sad because it does us so much damage and so much harm.
Yeah, what I think a lot of people don't realize, and I wish that I, had a magic ball to show every parent, like, this is the potential future that you're dealing with if your child, were to get
Yeah.
abused, and especially if there are things that you can do about it. It's not guaranteed you can learn abuse prevention, of course, and teach it to your kids, and abuse can still happen. There's no guarantee, 100%, but we can dramatically reduce the rates. And so why
Yeah.
wouldn't you take the steps to reduce it? But what I wish I could get parents to see, particularly those who, have that not my kid syndrome, it's like, oh, that happens in other neighborhoods, or that doesn't happen in
Yeah.
our community, etc. I wish I could show them a crystal ball to say, look, if something were to happen, this is the ramifications that you're dealing with. It is going to impact not just your child, but it's going to impact your life and potentially
Yeah.
that child's siblings. It can ripple through a family, particularly if it's someone within the family. It is going to, shatter your ability to trust people for,
Mhm.
for the rest of your life, really. And
Pretty much.
obviously that child, especially when there is grooming that's happened, I don't think people realize how that really shatters your reality, right? You're
Yeah.
like, I trusted that person. They seem like such a good person. I thought that they, I can't believe I didn't see it. And then the guilt that you are then dealing with as a
Yeah.
parent, your child feeling like they've destroyed the family, or they upset the parents, or they did
Yeah.
something wrong, the shame that they're carrying for what happened, for how they responded, for the fact that they, didn't tell or told the wrong person, or somebody didn't believe that, like
It's
that.
so destructive.
And that's just the emotional. And then we're talking about the court system and the
Yeah.
potential re-traumatization, and dealing with investigations, and if that person denies it, and then you're now dealing with trying to prove something that you might not have evidence for, like the cascade of issues that come from this incident or series of incidents is enormous. And
Yeah.
why not take the steps to prevent it by having those potentially uncomfortable conversations now, instead of having to deal with those situations after the fact? So,
Yeah.
I wish that I could paint that picture, but it's such a grim picture to paint for parents. It's like, please don't go down this path if you don't have to. Do the things
Yeah.
that are hard on the front end, so you don't have to
Yeah.
do the things that are hard on the back end. You're always going to have to choose a hard. You're either
Yeah.
choosing this hard or that hard. So which hard do you want to choose?
I think, and once you know, you can't unknow. Like it's catastrophic to a childhood, and it's catastrophic to a family, and it's can be catastrophic to the adulthood of that child when they become an adult. I mean, you mentioned so much of just the child being in their childhood, but when a person goes through such a trauma and it hasn't been, it's, hasn't been helped or healed or hasn't been supported through that, the person hasn't been supported. We know, and Australia has got some really good research now that it can lead to uh, substance abuse. It can lead to domestic violence. It can lead to further physical and neglect, harm, and ongoing generational trauma to the next generation and the next generation. So it's not just, like you said, choose your hard. Having these conversations could prevent that from ever happening and occurring. I mean, there's no promises in this world, but I'm with you. We know that someone having some of this information and having a safe person and having all of the resources and tools that we talk about is going to significantly reduce the potential. And I hate that I think like this, but sometimes for me, I think, oh, well, and this is how I thought when my daughter was younger, right? I was like, if my child knows what she needs to know, body safety, I know what to watch out for, and we catch it early, well, at least it's not my child. And I know that that sounds really horrible. We'd like these people to not even be offending against anyone or abusing anyone. But the thing that I had to get comfortable with is that we can only do when it comes to our kids and our family, we have to just protect who we can protect, and which is
Yeah.
our little world, our little family, and have those conversations within our little community.
Yeah.
Because they're the only people we can protect. We can't protect everyone. And even though we do this work, and I'm sure you feel the same way, sometimes I'm like, this problem is so big and people don't realize. And I just, like you, want to show them the crystal ball and go, come on, guys, get on board, because I want everyone to know this.
Yeah, and it is frustrating that this issue continues to be, well, first of all, besides being taboo, there is just this mentality of that happens to other people. Like, that's probably the one thing that drives me crazy is everyone thinks it's somebody else's kid. And I totally get it. Nobody wants to think it could be their own brother or sister or grandparent or
Yeah.
teacher or coach, somebody in their community, a family friend. Of course, we don't want to think that. And
No,
it's
that's
not
right.
about walking around paranoid and suspecting everyone. But
Yeah.
when you have the information, to me, it's actually a form of freedom
Mm.
because I actually now know what are the behaviors to look for. And I don't have to suspect everyone because
Yeah.
I have this information in my back pocket. So it is actually a form of freedom. And when we dismantle the stigma around this topic, if we can normalize it, to me, that's the biggest, I love this is why I love that you have a podcast and that you're, talking about this, because the more people are talking about this and normalizing this conversation, the more parents are listening and sharing it with another parent and saying, I think we all need to be hearing this.
Mm.
It takes a little bit of courage because I think sometimes parents go, am I going to be looked at as, that parent who, but the more that we are all that parent, then actually the person who doesn't want to talk about it is going to be the one that becomes that parent. And why don't they want to talk about it, right? Why wouldn't you want to talk about something that's going to help protect your kids?
Yeah.
So, we see it like Jonathan Haidt, the anxious generation,
Yeah.
who's talking about it when it, comes to online. And so a lot of parents are like, oh, my young child isn't online, so I don't have to worry about it just yet. But
Yeah.
this is happening in person too.
Mm.
And young children are equally as vulnerable for so many reasons. So we really just have to keep pushing and talking about this. And I was actually doing some research the other day looking at cancer and how
Mm.
cancer used to be seen as a taboo topic. You would never imagine that today
No.
because there are people that are running marathons to raise awareness for breast cancer, but 50 years ago, nobody wanted to talk about cancer. People who had cancer were terrified for people to know that they had cancer. There
Wow.
was this idea that, you somehow brought it upon yourself and,
Wow.
they were so uninformed about it that they thought it was contagious. Like there was so much misinformation and stigma around this, deadly, like, oh, if you have it, like, we don't want the family to know. Like there were so many
Wow.
ways that this was taboo. And we just were like, if you look at it today, you would never think that that was the case. Same
Yeah.
thing with AIDS. AIDS,
Yeah.
on the other hand, it was very obvious that it was a taboo thing. It had to do again with sexuality. I think that's typically the
Yeah.
connection point, but you would never think that with cancer. And
No.
so I started reading like, well, what changed that, right? And it was just education. It was just
Yeah.
people willing to be courageous enough to talk about it. And so I think, with this issue, it's the same thing. And we really are at a point, I think, in humanity where if we don't talk about this, the rates of perpetration are they're already through the roof. People don't know it because they don't want to talk about it. They see it in the news.
Yeah.
But again, it comes back to this, not my kid, not my community. It's not happening here. It doesn't matter. Alexandra Gucci, who is a very wealthy person,
Mhm.
comes from a well-known, wealthy family, was abused.
Yeah.
And you can say the same thing for someone who lives in a low-income home, with alcoholic parents or with
Yeah.
abusive, like it doesn't matter. This type of crime does not, discriminate. It is
No, it doesn't.
impacting everyone. And so, to me, that's I think a really important message we need to get across because survivors who have been through this know, it can happen to anyone, especially, if you've been abused by a sibling. Most people don't
Yeah.
want to talk about that. If it's been another child, people don't want to talk about, peers abusing peers, but that's, something that's on the rise.
Yeah.
There's so many factors, there's so many things that we need to get educated about. So I get that parents might feel overwhelmed by it. And I think for me, as someone who understands that, I was overwhelmed by it when my kids were little. I just want to say to parents, this isn't something that you're going to solve overnight. And like you
No.
said, Kristi, this is about protecting your own child. You don't have to protect everyone's child. You just need to have that conversation in your home with whoever you need to have that with, whoever is a potential caregiver for your child who's spending time with your child. That's who you need to be having this conversation with. Beyond just teaching your own child, you as the adult have to be that front line, that firewall,
Yeah.
having those conversations, which is why I love your cards so much too. Like, I was really
Thank you.
happy that you I think the more tools that are out there for parents, right, to be able to talk about this,
Yeah.
that's what's really needed right now, because that's what starts the education process. And then the support, I think for parents who have had lived experience, to find someone that understands and is compassionate.
Yeah.
If you're not ready to go to a therapist, I think sometimes people fear, it's going to open up a can of worms and I'm not ready to deal with that yet. That's okay. But you can find someone to help you have like grounding strategies so that when you do get triggered, you can
Mm,
navigate through those triggers and continue to do this work. You don't have to, deal with your own stuff just yet if you're not ready for that, but you
yeah.
do need to figure out how to move through this education so that you can teach it to your kids, so that you can have those conversations. You don't have to tell the world that something happened to you. I think it's absolutely appropriate and normal for any parent, whether they've had lived experience or not, to want to protect their kids from this. So, for those who are thinking, if I talk about this, people are going to think that it happened to me, they're not. They're just going to think, I guess you're, worried about this for your child. And so, as you get more and more educated, you can start to have those conversations with more ease.
Yeah.
And, listening to people, I know you have great experts that you're bringing on to your podcast. Like, share that. You don't even have to have the conversation. Just say, hey, I heard this really important podcast episode. I think you should listen to it. And that
Yeah.
will spark the conversation. They might get back to you and say, oh my gosh, I had no idea.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
And then you have a starting point for a conversation. And it has nothing to do with you, but with, experts talking about this and saying, hey, you guys all need to wake up. This is happening.
Yeah, we can't ignore it anymore. And ignoring it is actually really damaging and dangerous for our society and for our kids and families. There was so much in what you just said there. And I think I get frustrated with the not my child, not my parent. And one of the things you pointed out was this happens to every socioeconomic group. That my experience in the police and investigating is the ones that have more money have more to lose, and so they hide it better and they can manipulate, and they tend to be more manipulative in the system. The people who are maybe don't have the financial backing or don't have that opportunity to hide it as easier are the ones who we see a lot more in the media. And so, just recently, like 2 days ago, a famous Australian author who wrote kids' books was found engaging with child sex offenders online, and he's now been arrested and charged and is going through the court system. So, the thing is that it's not everyone, but it can be anyone. And in my experience, and I say this a lot, a child sex offender doesn't just offend every child that they see in every community. They pick them strategically. And they pick them because of how the child reacts and how what the child knows and whether the child understands what's happening or not. And they pick it based on the parents and whether the parents are involved and protective and have conversations. And if the vibe doesn't, they have this radar. It used to frustrate me because sometimes I would see, they like sharks. They can smell it, and it's not a great analogy, but they literally can go from family to family or child to child and know which ones to target based on
Yeah.
how what the child reacts. And so I don't think people realize how strategic and manipulative they are. And that's where, when I left the police and when I started writing my book and about the conversations with kids cards, it was about, it doesn't matter who's going to do it, just teach this to your kids so that they have the tools. And not only that, in my experience, and I'm sure you can relate, these tools are life skills. Some of these tools will help your child become more confident, speak up for themselves, advocate for themselves. They'll feel secure in their environments. They're able to understand, and they'll have the emotional intelligence. Like my daughter in year 12, she had some issues at school. She had to have a meeting with the principal and like the student services. And they actually said to me or to her, you're so emotionally intelligent and aware. You understand exactly what you're feeling and you're able to articulate it well. And my daughter looked at me because I was sitting next to her and said, it's because of my mum. And so the thing is when our children have all of those, can you imagine how much easier life is when we can understand exactly how we feel, whether it's I don't feel safe and know what to do and help seek in those moments, or I'm just feeling scared because this is something really different. I haven't done it before. I'm not feeling comfortable because this is really exciting as well, like fun to be scared at times. And so when our kids can understand all of that, and some adults don't even know how to
Yeah.
understand those feelings. So when I was teaching this stuff to my daughter at 2 and 3 years old, I was starting to learn. So it's amazing what this education can do, and not just this education, just changing the way we think about behavior in general for children.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking again, for those with lived experience, if they were shut down in their childhood, right? You are to be seen and not heard. If you
Mm.
were afraid to speak up and tell what happened, like that stays with you. And then if you're now trying to teach your child about how to set boundaries, but you were never allowed to set boundaries,
Yep.
that's really challenging, you know? So you may read this information and go, okay, this is what I need to teach my child, but you aren't modeling it because you can't
Yep.
set boundaries as an adult with other
Yep.
adults, right? And your kids are seeing that. So it is this really transformative process when you
Yep.
start to learn about this and you start to get educated and you start practicing it with them. It is equally empowering for you as a parent and
Yep.
healing in that process as it is to your child. And I think you can't fake that. You know, you can try, you can say, okay, you know, make sure that you speak up and use your voice. But if they see that you're not doing it, they're
Yep.
going to say something's not matching here. And so it's interesting that you say that with your daughter, because I'm in a similar position. My oldest is 14 now, and I know that they can speak up and they feel safe coming to talk to me. Hey mom, I heard this in the playground, or I heard this between my friends, or yeah, my
Yeah.
friends are doing this, or they're talking about these things. And we can have those honest conversations. When my kid was 4, I couldn't even say the word penis. Like it was very uncomfortable to me. You know, my
Yeah.
husband, fortunately, he grew up in a very sex positive home. I would say sex neutral home, actually. You know, they weren't
Yeah.
afraid to talk about it. They weren't actively talking about it. But in my home, you didn't say that word. And you
Yeah.
certainly didn't talk about private parts. It was like my mom just didn't know how to. She was a survivor herself, you know? So
Yeah.
we can actually break these cycles and we can empower kids in ways that we can't even have imagined for ourselves. And that feeling when your child gets to be older and you know that the work that you put in all those years growing up to where they're now teens, and you can see that this work paid off, is
Oh,
one of the
big
best
time.
feelings in the world. Yeah, it's
Big
just
time.
it's incredible, and it is hard work. You know, it can be at times when you're uncomfortable having, you know, how do I talk
Yeah.
to my kid about this, or how do I bring this up, or how do I talk to, you know, grandma about something that, you know, I know she's going
Yeah.
to push back on. I actually just posted this morning on Instagram as I went to the gym. I really didn't want to go this morning. It's like I could just
You
go to
forced
the
yourself.
coffee shop, yeah, and like have coffee and breakfast instead, but I pushed myself to do it. And I every time that I push myself to do those things, I remind myself like I know that long term, this I'm going to
Mm.
be so happy that I did this. And it's the same thing with those hard conversations. I don't necessarily want to talk to the school about this thing that I've been needing to talk. Like one of the things, for example, and I think the school board is probably, you know, if they get an email from me, they're like, oh no, what now, you know? But
Same
one
as
of the
me.
things, yeah, one of the things, and I have a note here somewhere, is that I want to talk to the school board about AI.
Oh, yeah.
That I don't think that there should be, you know, grok is something that
Oh,
kids can use at the school. And I think
goodness.
that, you know, the school is just completely unaware, and I have to have this conversation with them. And, you know, I talked to the parent advisory committee, you know, the PTA, and said this is what I want to propose. And, you know, even though I've been doing this work and they know the work that I do, I still have this sort of sense of like, oh, they're going to think I'm that parent. But I
Yeah.
push myself to go, you know what? If it's not me, then who?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
is it better to be uncomfortable and just maybe be seen as that parent, or let kids go on Grok and find all sorts of terrible things that they shouldn't be, you know, and then that could potentially lead to who knows what.
Yeah.
Based on the data, we see, you know, kids getting access to pornography early increases their risk for sexually harmful behavior. That's statistically and factually true. So would I rather be uncomfortable and have that conversation with the PTA and the school board, or just stay in my comfort zone and go, well, maybe hopefully nothing happens, you know?
And not
So,
my kid. Not
and
my
not
kid.
my
My
kid.
kid wouldn't do that.
Yeah. So the reason why I'm even doing it is because my son, when I asked him, do the kids in the school use AI? Well, yeah, sometimes they use Grok at lunchtime, and it's like, "Oh, okay, thank you, thank you for letting me know." And
Our
it's
kids
some,
just
you
want,
know,
our kids have grown up with we just tell our parents and we're not going to get in trouble for being honest.
yeah,
So, I mean, look, there's been times when I haven't reacted very well to news about something and I've had to do the repair afterwards and go, look,
yeah,
I wish I had have reacted differently. I'm so sorry that I didn't listen at the time. Let's are you okay if we reset this? Because
mm-hmm.
sometimes with our own, it's easier telling other people how to do it with their kids than it is to do it for
Yeah,
ours.
yeah, yeah, for
But our
sure.
kids are so used to just, oh yeah, I just talk about what's happening. And it's okay. I'm not going to get in trouble because I know. And even when they don't feel I remember when my daughter was about 8 years old, there was a girl in her class that was being really mean to a child with a disability. And she came in and she told me about it because she was like, I don't like it. And she was her friend. And so and
Mm,
when my daughter tried to step up and advocate for this other kid, the girl started bullying my daughter because how dare you tell me I can't do this? So
right.
I ended up having to step in and report it to the principal. And I remember having this conversation with my daughter. She's like, "No, no, please don't talk to them about it. It's not I don't want them to hate me. I don't want them to get." And it's real stuff. Our kids are dealing with
Mm-hmm.
these real issues. And I just remember sitting with her and I said, "I know that it feels like we're dobbing and telling on her. But if we go and speak to the principal and let them know and they can help her get support and try and find out if something's happening at home that's making her behave this way, then maybe we're actually helping because then she won't do it to someone else or she might get the support she needs. And now we know that, something's happening." I said, so it's actually a good thing when we tell an adult. It's actually a good thing when we report it to the people who are meant to help. And so, that was kind of like a stepping point because every time afterwards she would, like your son, come to you and say, "Oh, yeah, that's happening." And then you're arguing with yourself, going, do I report it? Do I keep it to myself? Am I going to be that parent?
Yeah,
And in most cases, I'm like you, I've gone in and had a conversation, emailed the principal. I had the principal's personal email because I was like, hey, just giving you a heads up that this is happening, giving you a heads up that this is actually, here's some links just so you know what's going on here. And,
yeah.
it's a tough gig. It's a tough gig being that parent, but too many people turn away.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is challenging because I think a lot of parents are trying to figure out what's the right decision. Do I step in? And, there's been situations like that similar to yours where, my child has told me something and I've had to say, I just want to let you know, thank you for, first of all, for telling me, for being brave
Mm,
and telling me, because the idea of being a tattletale is very real for kids.
yeah.
There's peer pressure. There's the fear of, I'm going to be seen as like a snitch and that I can't defend myself or handle this myself. And so even with other parents, I had a situation where my child found out about this show that he was ended up searching something on YouTube about because we have the policy of, it's the device is always in a common space.
Yep.
My husband was like, "Oh, what are you watching?" And it was just a review about a show that's actually not for kids, but it
Ah,
it looks like it could be, but it's not.
yeah.
And he said, "Oh, my friend, mentioned this show." And we're like, "Oh, that's definitely not a show for kids." So
Yeah.
you can
And
stop
kids
searching
don't
about it.
know.
We can tell you what it is about, but it's not. It's actually a show that's like on a streaming service. So we
Oh,
have the streaming service with a code. So I knew
yeah.
that he wouldn't be able to access it, right? And it's that checklist of like knowing what to do that you're like, okay, we're good.
Yeah.
I was able to see that the kid, he was looking this up. We were able to talk to him about it. He wasn't in trouble. We know he can access the show. All
Mm,
those things were check marked. But then I thought, this is a kid that my child is always hanging out with. I think his parents should know. And so I was like, do I have that conversation with the parents, and how do I have it so that that kid doesn't get in trouble, but also then my kid doesn't look like he's being a rat for,
yeah.
so it took me a bit, and I was like, okay, I need to talk to them. I knew them, fortunately, and they're very nice people. So
Yeah.
I just laid it out and I said, look, it's not about getting him in trouble. Maybe he wasn't aware. I just want to let you guys know so that you can have a conversation or shut down the show. It's not appropriate. It's like almost soft porn and he should not be watching it. Anyway, explain the whole thing. They were very happy that I, reached out to them. Very cool parents too that were like, I'm sure, very cool about talking to him and wanting to
Yeah.
be on board with like helping him navigate. These kinds of shows aren't, appropriate. Anyway, the parent actually had, funny enough, caught the show, didn't, let him watch it. So he knew, but he somehow still had told my child about it. I was like, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But it was one of those, like, I was uncomfortable having that
Yeah.
conversation. I didn't want my kids to be uncomfortable, but we talked about it. And that's the beauty of this is by the time your kids are older and you've had these things, as part of your it's weaved into your parenting, it's a normal conversation that doesn't feel weird and awkward. You might
Yeah.
still feel a little bit awkward, like having to reach out to those parents or to the school or to whoever, but you and your child have a
Yes.
safety connection. And that
Yes.
is one of the most important things because the last thing you want is if in the event that something happens that your child is dealing with it alone or that they don't tell and it continues to escalate and they're just living with that trauma and then you find out about it when they're in their 30s, that's the
Yeah.
worst case scenario. So this work is not easy, but it is absolutely 1000% worth doing because you are building a bond that
Yep.
your child can count on you, that they know you're their advocate, and you're doing everything that you can to mitigate and reduce the risk, which we all need to be doing because unfortunately this issue, this crime is not getting better. We think
No.
by now it's getting better, but it's, the numbers are not showing that. The
No.
statistics, it is starting online with older children who then become adults who go down the porn rabbit hole. That's one huge area that is, a big issue to adult offenders who are, perpetrating on young children and people don't know and they are afraid to say something if they see something because they don't want to accuse somebody. They don't have the facts. They don't have the
Mm.
details. They don't know, how do I talk about this to someone? They might see a teacher who's doing something that kind of is inappropriate, but they're like the star teacher, so they don't know how to talk about it. Like we need to get educated. It's just not something that parents have the luxury of
Ignoring
dismissing,
anymore.
ignoring. Yeah, it's just not. To me, it's almost irresponsible to
Mm.
not get educated about this.
For sure. I mean, we teach road safety. We teach, what to do around a hot oven. We teach our kids all of these safety messaging, how to swim, all of the things. And yet one of the biggest ones. And I think because people don't want to live in a world where this is actually exists, yet almost every family, and if not every family, I would say that every family has a member that has been sexually abused as a child. And whether they've disclosed or not disclosed, we know that the stats are pretty horrific in regards to disclosure.
Yeah.
And in Australia, we have the stats that it's on average 24 years before first disclosure, 30 for men, 99% of men will never tell anyone. And
Mhm.
we know that boys, they're not at the same rate as girls. In Australia, it's 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 5 boys, but boys are still very much victims of child sexual abuse. And it's, like I said, catastrophic for them. And we also, a couple of years ago, had research that showed a child that had been, or an adult who had been sexually abused as a child, actually has an increased rate of death in middle age because
Mm.
the stress and the impacts and the substance abuse, and they have an increased risk of about 8 times so dying in middle age is more common for someone who's been sexually abused as a child. And if we have
Yeah.
all of this unhealed trauma, don't even get to that stage where you might not be able to connect with your family. When your kids turn up, you might not be able to have a healthy, safe relationship with your kids because you're holding on to this trauma that has basically made you not trust anyone, not trust yourself, not trust your instincts, your gut feelings, your early warning signs. There's a saying that says when you get sexually abused by a stranger, you don't trust the world, but when you get sexually abused by someone you don't trust yourself.
Mm.
And it's so true because you were talking about grooming and the impacts of grooming. And so many people, first of all, they didn't know they were being groomed as a child. So then they take it on as like, I asked for this, I deserve this, or they start taking on the burdens. And the one thing that I saw time and time again, and that breaks my heart, is that children often take on the responsibility of what adults should be taking on. They take
Yeah.
on the responsibility of, it's my fault if the family breaks up. It's my fault that I was abused. It's my fault because I spoke up. It's my fault. And so that follows them their whole lives. And there's just so much damage. And I wish I didn't have to do this work. But after
Yeah.
seeing what I've seen, and you yourself, you know that this work is necessary. And question for you though, with regards to that, it's not getting better. I do have people say to me, do you think that you've got confirmation bias? Because you
Mm.
see it and you talk to so many survivors and victims. Do you think that you just believe it's really bad because you see it all the time? And I'm like, no. Thank God for research, because the research is showing no. But I think what I have seen is it's always been bad. It's just we're now seeing kids have the body safety education. They're now being taught it at schools. I hope that's the same case in where you are. And so they now know that they have rights and they can speak up. Whereas 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or when I was a child, we had no rights, or we didn't know that we had them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that you bring that up, because I've had people say to me, well, I think the rates are going up because kids are actually reporting now, and statistically speaking, the rates have always been high. We've, people in the field that researchers, experts that I've talked to have always said they're likely higher.
Yeah.
It's just that people, never reported. And so, yeah, we are seeing that more kids are reporting. I mean, we saw, and this was actually a really good test case when COVID happened,
Yeah.
the rates dropped, right? Because there weren't mandated reporters that were
Yes.
able to report and say, I'm seeing signs, this child isn't showing up, or I'm seeing, this behavior or this physical evidence. So there was a drop in rates of reporting, not because kids weren't getting abused, but because those people who were watching, who were caring enough to say, I need to report, like, they weren't reporting. And actually during that time, rates of abuse, which we later found out had actually gone up.
Yeah, of course, because they're in the environments.
They were trapped with abusers. This was one of the things that I think everyone in the industry was feeling really desperate about. It's like these kids are not getting the help they need, and now they're locked in spaces with their abusers. So it was really heartbreaking. But when the lockdown opened up, what we saw was that those children were able to finally report. And when they went back to those spaces where there were mandated reporters who could say, they were reporting, and it was showing that the rates had gone back up. Now, did that mean that during the time that, they weren't reporting, it wasn't happening? No, it was happening. And in fact, there were skyrocket rates that were happening online because offenders were getting access to kids. So there was a trickle effect to this, and we're seeing those ripple effects now, even years later, of how that peer to peer became increasing over the last 5 years since the pandemic, in large part because of the online piece. So when people say, is it really that it was bad before, or is it really, really bad now? Unfortunately, it is. The research, the data is not lying to us.
No.
And in fact, what we are seeing particularly concerning is the peer-to-peer element, and what we should be paying attention to, because those youth are going to go into adulthood and needing intervention so that they don't become repeat offenders as they go into adulthood. So it's really important that, we are talking to kids about, body rights, boundaries, consent, not just for their own safety. Obviously, we want kids to be safe, but we also want them to be safe to others. And that's another equally important reason why we need to talk about abuse prevention and body safety. I have 3 boys. I want to make sure that they are going to go off into the world and be safe towards others, as well as being safe and protected themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, in my experience, I've seen young people harm each other or harm their sibling or whatever. And that guilt that follows them around, it's not something that you can just forget and move on from, like, oh, well, made a mistake. It can be quite traumatic for both the child that was harmed and the child that harmed through and quite often with what we're seeing with the online space is that they're just following or doing what they've seen, or that they've been coached to do by a predator, or so it's not fair to our kids if we don't teach them this, because they are being left completely unawares, both by adult offenders and by their peers. And in actual fact, I've spoken about this a few years ago. My daughter came home and she's like, Mum, I'm the only one who hasn't been sexually abused in my friendship group of 6. And they were only, 15, 16 years old at that stage. And I was like, what? Like, to me, that's not even the stats. The stats are 1 in
Yeah.
3. So it was above that, but and they were all different, really different stories. But it was like, okay, the thing is that I don't know about you, but when you go to your kids' sport or to like the school and you pick up your kids, do you get like parents going, hi, I just need to ask you a question. What should I do here? Because I get it all the time, constantly, or I did when I was teaching and coaching my daughter's netball team and like, at the school. When she got to high school, it was more so at sports and like, because people want to know this stuff, they just don't know where to get it. So I guess my next question and to wrap up is, if you're a parent, and most people on this podcast are, but for all the parents here, if you had one thing that you would say, look, this helped me and this is what I would do next, or what would it be?
I mean, the first thing is to get tools, is get conversation cards, get books, get access to resources that help you have these conversations, because most people, like I said, didn't get this themselves when they were kids, so they don't know where to start, and that can feel really daunting. And you don't have to, reinvent the wheel. There are resources out there, and today more than ever, there are amazing children's book authors that focus on body safety, that have resources. There are books for parents that are teaching and talking about this. Like, any piece of information that you can get your hands on is going to be helpful.
Yeah.
But I want to say, like, don't overwhelm yourself. Try to dive in and do this, in a week, and then realize, like, oh my God, this is too much and I don't know what to, like, don't overwhelm yourself. Take it one day at a time. Do what you can, a little bit every week. You don't want your kid to be like, okay, mom, I get it. Like,
come on.
do
We've
we need
talked
to talk
about this already.
this? Yeah. So
We've all seen
just
it.
take it easy. I think do one step at a time and just get yourself some good tool. There are such great resources. Like I said, your cards are really great too, because even with a book, parents are like, okay, I read the book. Now what? Okay, well, here's how to keep those conversations going, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to always have the book, but having that is a good starting point, and then keep it going. So that would be my recommendation, is get some tools and get started. It's never too late, no matter where you are in the game. I think for parents who have older kids, if your child is like 9 or 10 and you're like, all these resources are for little kids, well, get yourself some books that are for parents. One example is Kimberly King has a really great book that's for parents. Feather Burkauer also is another one of my favorite. She has some great resources.
Oh, wow. I haven't heard of Feather.
Janine Sanders also has a book for parents. There are people out there who are putting great work out there. I have a book that's going to be coming out in 2027. Yay. So I'm hoping that will help to just look for those resources that can help you get these conversations started, no matter where your kid is. And if you have teens, all the more important, just find a way to have these icebreaker conversations. It might have to be, about porn or sex, and that might feel extremely awkward and uncomfortable. But again, there are, educators out there, sexual health educators that have resources to help you have those conversations. It's not something that you should wait too long or keep putting off.
No, definitely not. No. And that's all really good. And I think books were my saving grace when I was unsure. I was like, here's a book and do you want help reading it? If she was able to read, or we read it together, or like, hey, I saw this part. And also just admitting, hey, I never had anyone talk about this stuff with me. I really hope that parents realize it's not, you can't stuff it up. You just have to start somewhere, and your kids will go, oh, and like the most probably rewarding part is when they come to you and they go, hey, Mum, I'm not sure about this. Oh, Mum, what's a 69? And you're like, whoa, didn't think you were ready to talk about that yet. But, like, it's okay to just not know as well. So I'm so grateful for you, and I'm so grateful we had this conversation. I hope we have many more, and I know we will. But how do people find you if they want to check out what you're doing, where you are, what you're working on? Because I do actually have listeners from all over the world. So please share how they can find you.
Yeah. Thanks again, Kristi, for having me. I had a fun time chatting about this. I know this isn't the most easy or fun topic to talk about, but I think, between two people who have known what can come out of this on the good side or the bad side, it's always great to talk to someone who understands and can push people into having these conversations in their own lives. So thank you again for having this podcast. People can find me at consentparenting.com and also on Substack. I'm really moving away from social media. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it right now.
Me too. It's
As
hard.
I'm sure you can imagine. Yeah. So yeah, people can find my Substack, which is where I write my blogs and workshops and content. So you can go to consentparenting.com to find all of it there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And like I said, I hope we have many more conversations, and I hope that we see a tide. I think in our lifetime we will see the tide turn a little bit, but can be very hard to see through the trees kind of thing. Like you see the forest through the trees, because it just feels like, there's so much of this going on. There is, but I feel like you do, that it is changing. Like it is making a difference, one family at a time. So
absolutely. It's preventable. That's what the thing I want people to know is this is preventable. It isn't inevitable, and every parent plays a role in that. So if we all band together, we can make that happen. So that's the vision.
Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Before you click away, I want to leave you with this. Conversations like this can feel uncomfortable. They can stir up fear, confusion, even resistance. But avoiding topics like harmful sexualized behaviours in children doesn't make children safer. Informed adults do. What Rosalia shared today isn't about panic. It isn't about labelling children, and it isn't about shame. It's about recognising behaviour early, responding calmly, and creating environments where safety is actively taught and supported. Prevention isn't built on silence, it's built on understanding. If this conversation challenged you in a good way, I encourage you to sit with it, reflect on it, share it with another adult who needs to hear it. And if you're looking for practical tools to help you have calm, confident body safety conversations with the children in your life, you'll find links below to all my resources and support services. As always, if today's topic brought up anything personal for you, please reach out for support. I've included trusted services in the description. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being willing to learn, and thank you for choosing prevention over avoidance.